Welcome everybody to Poetica Marketing's latest webinar. We're talking specifically about marketing for 2025 and how to plan for a very unpredictable marketplace with some best practices. This webinar is going to focus primarily on some of the tech developments we've been seeing over the last 12 months or so, some of the concerns that I worry about moving into the year ahead, and some of the strategies we're using at Poetica to contend with those. It's not necessarily going to touch on the latest election cycle. That is something that we can kind of talk about towards the end, what that could potentially mean for businesses. But there are some other more pressing issues that I want to make sure that we touch on. So I think most of you on this call have at least some passing familiarity with Poetica Marketing. But really quick, Poetica Marketing is a content marketing agency and events company, which means we help companies stand out online and in person. The team is primarily myself and my wife and partner, Regina. She's our event coordinator. You'll see I'm listed as founder and creative director. I don't really like titles in my position because I'm generally just kind of the guy that does everything that needs to get done. So I'm the salesperson, CEO, creative director, social media manager, whatever needs to be produced is my primary hat. So the team is primarily us. And for today, we're really going to focus on first setting the table, understanding what those challenges are that lie ahead for us as business owners and marketers in 2025. And then we'll look at some potential solutions for overcoming those challenges. And then we'll have an opportunity to ask questions. So while we will have that scheduled Q&A at the end, I do want people to feel comfortable asking questions during the presentation today. So if you raise your hand during the presentation, I will unmute you and we can have a quick conversation and have an opportunity to answer those questions live, especially as some of this gets a little bit more technical. I don't want it to go too far over anybody's head. So if we have to take a moment to kind of level set, make sure we're all on the same page, I'm happy to do that. But with all of that said, let's dive into the nitty gritty and talk about some of those challenges ahead for 2025. One of the big uncertainties I kind of see on the horizon really stems around Google. There is quite a lot happening with Google from a legal perspective and the antitrust and the monopoly. It's at risk of being broken up, which is a terrifying prospect for many marketers as we rely so heavily on Google's various tools, on search, on advertising, and everything else that goes along with it. And seeing that break up could disrupt a lot of data streams. It could disrupt a lot of our processes as marketers, and as business owners as well. The AI overviews are also disrupting search results and interfering with site traffic. It used to be if you could just grab the featured snippet, you would rank number one and people would have an easy portal into your website. And now that AI overview is pushing even the featured snippet down. And then, you're still seeing people also ask in map packs and other things that disrupt the search engine results page. So everything's just getting more muddy from a search perspective. And what's also crazy is I think this was the first year Google didn't outright own 50% of the ads market. Amazon and TikTok are very quickly expanding their ad space. And I think the numbers where they now collectively own 51% of the ad market, which is a pretty big encroachment on Google's territory there. So we're seeing a lot of changes on SEO. We're seeing a lot of changes on the advertising side. And all of this just generally means a lot of chaos for everybody involved. But especially with TikTok, there was a lot of chatter earlier in the year about whether or not TikTok would get banned in 2025. And that remains to be seen, but the idea was that it would be banned in January, which is a crazy idea. I don't, for the record, I don't think that's going to happen, but if it did disappear overnight, it would mean companies that have built themselves off of TikTok and off of TikTok ads would lose immediate access to 1.5 billion monthly users. It would mean completely pivoting their marketing strategies to reach their target audience and continue growing without a space that they've relied on so heavily. And it's also just a great reminder that social media in general is unpredictable. It is consistently getting more and more competitive, both on the organic side, but especially on the paid side. Advertising on social media is chaotic, it's expensive. There are more privacies and protections in place for consumers, especially in the United States, than ever before. And we as marketers and advertisers are missing out on a lot of data tracking capabilities. And there is just a lot of misinformation out there. And even tools like Facebook Ads Manager isn't quite as accurate as it used to be. And so it's harder to make decisions based off of the information that we're getting back from the platforms. All of that is very tricky to contend with. And on top of that, we're also getting a lot of competition from AI itself. So yes, we talked a little bit about those AI overviews, but we're also seeing just a lot of content coming out that's been AI generated. And I have a lot of feelings about AI. That's a conversation for another time. I think it's a wonderful tool. Problem that I see though from the marketing side is we have a lot of companies that finally have a resource to help them mass produce written content and visual assets. And so you have people who aren't trained in copywriting or in graphic design using AI to create these new resources for themselves. But because they've never actually been trained or schooled in these disciplines, they're often producing content that is subpar and not necessarily recognizing that. So they're producing and publishing bad blogs and bad graphics, and then they're putting them out in the world en masse, and it's hurting their brand, but it's also hurting the market in general. Because there's so much AI noise, it's disrupting the consumer experience. It's confusing consumers and it's turning them away to go and search for other resources. So net negative for everybody involved. So, what do we do with all of this in mind? Well, there are a few different action steps that we can take, but before we get there, I think it's really important to keep things simple and completely level set on what marketing actually is. And it's very easy to overcomplicate marketing strategy and get into the weeds with tech and metrics. But fundamentally, I think marketing comes back to three important questions. And if we can level set on these questions moving into the new year, I think it helps us gain perspective on how we navigate some of the challenges ahead. So I think marketing really comes down to three questions. Who's your target audience? What's the message you want to express? And what's your strategy for reaching that audience with that message? And we'll talk a little bit more about how to refine these questions later in today's presentation. But your target audience isn't just business owners or it's not just consumers. It is an age range, it's a gender, it's a location, it's a profession. And the more specific we can get with our target audience, the easier our marketing becomes long term. Your messaging has to be really precise, but it also comes from, what is the unique challenge that keeps your audience up at night? What is the unique value proposition that you provide that nobody else in your space can deliver? And then their strategy for reaching your audience really comes from, okay, we just saw that it's really bad to put all of our eggs into Google search traffic, and it's really bad to put all of our eggs into TikTok marketing. So how do we make sure that we have a cohesive blend of outreach so that we can reach our target audience and convert them into paying customers with the right messaging? With that in mind, I think 2025 becomes the year that more than ever, it's important to own your audience. And by that, I mean TikTok can disappear overnight. Same thing with Facebook. We've even seen that, I think, a couple times this year. There were issues with Facebook and Instagram servers where it was just unavailable for a few hours in a couple of days, which is bananas. I mean, we've built a society that exists partially on the backs of these platforms. And when they disappear, people go kind of crazy. And if we build our businesses inside of these platforms, if they disappear, if there is um, a server that goes down or an issue with even something as simple as electricity, we lose access to our customers. So now more than ever, it's really important to focus on collecting email addresses, to collecting mailing addresses, and collecting phone numbers. We can debate for a long time about whether or not it's appropriate to text our audience or send them mail or even to send emails on a mass scale. But the important thing to remember is that if we have people opt in to receiving messages from us, and if we deliver value in those messages, they're not going to send us the spam. They're not going to get upset. If anything, if we're doing our jobs right as business owners and marketers, they're going to be thankful for receiving messages. They're going to be happy about hearing from us. And that's a really, really hard um, pinnacle of marketing to reach, but it is something that is attainable and it's an important goal to strive for. So, how do we get here? Well, we have to look for opportunities to collect email addresses and other contact information. So, yes, you can have a subscribe to our newsletter button on your website, but that's not the only thing, right? You can run ads to collect email addresses. You can have gated content where you give people access to exclusive content in exchange for an email address. You can hold live events and collect emails. You can hold a webinar like this and use that as an opportunity to collect emails. We did an open house for a vet clinic over the summer, and we just had somebody at a table who manually wrote down the contact information of 200 people who came through. There are a lot more opportunities than you realize to gather audience information and then reach out to them on a consistent basis so you can nurture those leads and turn them into customers. And then once you have that information, we can rely on email, phone numbers, mailing addresses to maintain a consistent stream of communication. Again, not abusing that power and that privilege of having their contact information. I think this is also a time to really think about beefing up your SEO, your search engine optimization strategy, but also your content strategy as a whole. Who knows what's going to happen with Google? I wish I did, but we're probably going to see a little bit market share taken over by the Bings, the Yahoos, the DuckDuckGos of the world. And competing for those platforms is very similar to the way we compete on Google, but it's just oftentimes a little bit different. Like Bing, for example, takes into account social media posts and social links of your blogs and other content, whereas Google, that's not as important. But as a general SEO best practice that I often see companies miss is promoting the new content that they are working so hard to produce. I think it's also going to make a lot of sense to look out for communities like Reddit and Quora, which are starting to have a greater and greater and greater pull in the search results. In case you missed it, Reddit and Google have some sort of data sharing relationship going on right now. So we're often seeing Reddit content showing up really well in search results, which also makes sense just generally when you think about it, because it's sort of the last online recluse for people to share peer-to-peer built information and have real human interactions without corporate interference. And so these can be resources that we sort of leverage in our overall marketing to reach a wider swath of people, but also reach a really focused target audience. So as we're thinking about this, we really want to focus on creating better content that ranks really, really well. And this really starts with creating original content that's really, really high quality. And this is maybe one of the hardest things to do because as we look to create content as businesses, we have to recognize that we can't reinvent the wheel. And any piece of content that we look to create has already been created probably 100 times before by our competitors. But there are ways to really inject that personal flavor into your blogs or into any kind of content that you create. Think about your own personal brand. Think about the experiences that you have that make you and your profession or your professional experience unique, and weaving those stories into the content that you create. I read something really, really great the other day about a content creator who, before he sits down to create any piece of long form content, he'll reach out to other industry pros and just survey them for advice on the topic that he's going to write about, and he'll use that to get expert opinions into his articles, make them more polished, have more of that unique professional insight. So it's not just another rehashing of recycled blogs that have already been found 100 times before on the internet. I think there are ways to use AI responsibly. Like I said, I think AI is a wonderful tool. Um, I've used ChatGPT countless times this morning in my research, even just as a curious person wanting to like look up random basketball facts. Like it's very, very quick. It's a very, very useful research tool. And it's also a great tool for getting a starting point on content. The thing that we need to remember, right, is that AI makes mistakes. There was a really high profile case, I think last year, about a lawyer who used AI to help him out in a personal injury case that should have been open and shut in his client's favor. But the AI cited court history that didn't exist. And when he asked for it to verify these cases, it said, yeah, these are real, but it made up facts, quote unquote, and got the lawyer in trouble, lost the case, got fined, big issues. So we really have to be careful with how we use AI. But if we use it as a tool, it can help us create content faster, it can help us create richer content while still having our own spin and personality in it. We also want to look at distribution, right? A lot of companies build content and they put it in one place and they forget about it. So they might make a graphic and only put it on their Facebook page, or they might create a blog and they only put it on their website. We have all of these channels available to us. We can send things out in the mail. We can put things on our website. We can put things on social media. We can send things through email. We have partner relationships where our partners might be willing to co-host some of our content or collaborate on posts. We have all of these opportunities for linking our content all over the internet. And if we're ignoring those opportunities, we're really doing ourselves a disservice. And that sort of leads me to the idea of guest posting and backlinking opportunities. These are really underutilized opportunities from an SEO perspective when we can look out at other blogs or other industry publications that might be willing to publish some of our own original ideas. We can submit an article, get a backlink over to the website. These are really valuable for elevating our presence. As part of that too, and we'll talk about a little bit more in a few moments, but even looking at opportunities to guest post or guest appear at speaking opportunities or on podcasts, these can also be really easy, low-hanging fruit in spreading your brand, spreading your personal image around, and really reaching more people in a way that isn't really difficult. If you're already a subject matter expert, in a lot of cases, all you have to do is show up, talk a little bit about what you know, and then reap the benefits from there. With all of that in mind, I do think it's important to talk about how do we stand out from AI, especially in a world where people are potentially overusing AI in creating content. So I kind of gave that example earlier where we see companies that are mass producing content. I met two young gentlemen a couple of years ago, maybe a year ago at this point. They were starting a real estate company and they were using AI to mass produce blogs, and they were churning out about a blog a day and publishing it on their website. And they asked me to do a very quick audit. And what I found was none of their blogs were ranking because none of them were really optimized for the thing they were designed to do. There were no internal links. There was no focus on keyword research. There was no focus on making a human connection with the reader. There was no call to action. So they spent all of this time just producing low quality content that really serves no business purpose when they could have taken that same amount of time and invested it in maybe creating one really high quality piece of content per week that would actually serve them a lot better. So with that in mind, it's still really important to create really well-structured blog posts and other content. And that includes doing things like having those internal links, including alt text behind your images, thinking about opportunities to include infographics and videos, and turning your blog content into other assets, turning them into images that could be shared on social media, or turning them into text-based videos for social media or YouTube, or creating these really, really rich, in-depth pieces of alternative content. I think one way to really stand out in an AI-driven world is to have more in-person events and make more personal connections, hold webinars, hold seminars, hold open houses, host a happy hour, make those connections, those human to human connections, get in front of your target audience and keep technology out of it. Really work on building those relationships. All of us have our own personalities and our own case studies. And so those are things that AI can't really steal from us. They can't steal that from our business, and our competitors can't steal our track record for success. And weaving those case studies into your content and into your stories can really help you stand out. And I think another thing that can really help out is focusing on your own original research. Survey your clients, your target audience, your competitors, the industry as a whole, to create original content that gets cited by other resources, by your competitors, by AI itself, and helps you stand out on a larger scale. And one last note I want to share here, excuse me, is the idea of building a personal brand and becoming somebody that people look to for guidance, and really helping yourself stand out on LinkedIn or wherever else you are trying to reach your target audience. The problem I see with a lot of, especially solopreneurs, but small business owners in general, is they're not really comfortable being out in the open, and they try to put their brand out in the forefront. And while there's definitely value in building up your brand and using or in elevating your brand as much as possible, when you are a small business, even like Poetica, it's much more valuable to put yourself first, because people are going to recognize you often before they recognize your logo. With that in mind, it's really important to write your own blogs and use your own newsletters to create original content on LinkedIn. And by the way, I should clarify that I think this is also important for salespeople too, to develop their own personal brand, because it's going to make them more memorable as you are reaching out to different prospects and leads. It's going to help you stand out from the competition. It's going to make you a lot more memorable. Be consistent in your designs and imagery across all channels. So figure out a few templates that you can work in inside social media and your blog, and stick to that so your brand is consistent across all channels. And, again, consider running your own live events, webinars, seminars. All of these can be really valuable in elevating what you do and making you more memorable in a hyper competitive world. So as we kind of close out and before we get to Q&A here, let's put it all together and return back to this idea of keeping it simple. Who's your target audience? What's your message? What's your strategy for reaching your audience with that message? So to dive in a little bit deeper into who's your target audience, we really want a thorough ideal customer profile. Figure out who we're trying to reach, where they spend their time. And really, we're looking at the problems that they face. We're looking at age, gender, location, occupation, education level. What do they care about? What are their wants, needs, and desires? The more descriptive we can get in this, the better we can craft our message. And we can use inside of our message all of those details that we just collected in that for them in our ICP, but we can also factor in our branding guidelines, our value proposition, the key differentiators that separate us from the competition. All of these are really, really important for crafting a meaningful message. And then or then finally, we have this strategy for distribution. We have to make sure our message gets where the people are. So develop an ideal marketing and advertising strategy that actually gets to the target audience that you're trying to reach. And this is where half the battle is in marketing, right? It's not just crafting that message, but it's figuring out how to cut through the noise. We looked at a lot of those earlier with email, with direct mail, with text. Um, but we can also explore new opportunities in advertising and really reevaluate our strategies on social media and in other areas to really help us stand out and reach a new audience. All of that said, we burned through that really fast. Do we have any questions with all of that said? Anything you want to recap on or anything else that you're curious about? Perfect. Well, if we don't have anybody who wants to raise their hands, thank you so much for attending today. If you do have any questions to kind of follow up, feel free to reach out to me directly at patrick@poeticamarketing.com. You can also reach me at 412-522-0647. You can also find Poetica at poeticamarketing.com. Last chance for questions here before I stop the webinar. Perfect. All right. Well, everyone have a great day. And oh, sorry, Cami has a question. Uh, Cami, go ahead. Oh, you are currently muted, Cami. Cami, are you there? I believe you can also use the chat if you want to drop it in there. And Charlie, we have a question from you. You want to go ahead as Cami works out her tech issues?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
When I was working with Jason to get ready for my podcast, he had this thing he called a blueprint. And one of the things in the blueprint, when he talked about, you're talking about your target audience, he wanted me to come up with sort of an avatar of
Mhm.
where my ideal client lives. I even went so far as to come up with a name for them, how many kids they have. Is that what you're referring to when you're talking about really getting some details?
Exactly that. And having that avatar close to your desk or wherever it is that you work on your marketing materials is really, really valuable. I used to do this a lot when I was still in journalism. I wrote specifically for accounting professionals. And one of the things that I did was I was friendly with a couple of different AP managers that were subscribers, and we knew each other on a first name basis. So what I did was I took their LinkedIn profile pictures and just hung them up in my cubicle. And whenever I was struggling trying to explain something, I would just kind of look at their pictures and figure out how would I explain this if they were in the room with me. And that was incredibly helpful in just keeping myself on task and trying to explain things as clearly as possible. So as you develop that avatar and you figure out who it is that you're trying to reach, use AI or find an example from the real world and kind of keep that nearby so that as you're working on your stuff, you can kind of reflect and look directly at them, kind of figure out the language that you want to use.
Why does that work? I mean, if I create the avatar that I created was this sort of 55-year-old man that lives in the suburbs, but does that preclude me from communicating, say, with women or younger people?
Your so you might have a wider audience, technically speaking, but you have a very refined target audience that you definitely want to work with. And the fact is, the way you communicate ideas with that target audience is going to be different than the way you would communicate the same ideas to, say, your grandmother
Oh,
or a 5-year-old. And so, if you can really hone in on exactly who it is you're trying to communicate with, you can really hone in your message so it resonates with them specifically. The One of the biggest challenges for new business owners, right, is to learn that their business is not for everyone and their ideal customer is not everyone. It's a very specific demographic. And if we can cater our message for that specific demographic, we can do a lot better.
good. Thank you. I mean, I thought I understood why, but that really clarifies it. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions? All right, perfect. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for, oh, we got one more from Davina. What you got, Davina?
I guess with regard to building a personal brand, one of my bigger concerns is honestly just privacy. I really value kind of not having my professional and personal life tied, but I find that very challenging to manage, especially as my professional life kind of is beginning to encroach on even just my name.
Hmm.
So
And
that's
I,
kind of,
yeah, I think it's an interesting question, right? Because we live in a world where privacy is kind of an illusion. But I think I would start with, what your goals are on that end, because if your goal on that end is to, in your case, I know you've done like a lot of your own freelancing in the past, but if your goal at this point is to move up like the corporate ladder, that's a very different style of building a personal brand than it is if you were out hunting down your own sales. So if you're trying to build your personal brand to stand out to like recruiters or hiring managers, then it really becomes an idea of how do I build out a really strong portfolio and how do I demonstrate that I'm an expert in what it is that I do. So in that sort of case, having a really complete LinkedIn profile, updating your profile when you have a new case study to share, or even just kind of talking about what it is that you do and you think you do really well, or anything that you have perspective on, and then monitoring what your privacy levels are so that maybe you're not immediately discoverable to just random people, but also so that when you do connect with a hiring manager or another professional, it's easier to find you and find your content and your thought leadership. I think there's something to be said about building a brand without a face attached to it. It's hard. It's hard just to like push a logo out there. There are definitely cases of like artists who like never show their face. I'm the first person that comes to mind is like Sia with her big hair. Like I don't know what she looks like. I just know if I see a big blob of hair that's probably Sia. Another great example is like there's this famous guitarist named Buckethead, and he wears like a KFC bucket on his head and like a hockey mask, and like for a long time nobody knew what he looked like, but it was iconic. And I don't think that you need to go around wearing a hockey mask, but if you had something that was you, if there was like some sort of costume that you wore or like a big hat that hid part of your face and that was part of your overall branding shtick, that might help give you a little bit more visibility without sacrificing so much of who you are. I guess the alternative too is if you started a brand with like a pen name or a professional name, that would help you protect some of your personal identity as well.
thank you. That makes sense. And towards the end there, I think you kind of got more into what I was concerned about, more of the personal life, being a writer and, an SEO, like, personal writing, you want to do like, fiction or something like that, and you don't kind of want them matching, but a pen name does seem to be the way to go there. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything else before we sign off? Cool. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for attending today. This has been recorded, so I will share this out on YouTube probably later this week. It'll be on the website as well, and I will send all of you a copy. So thank you for attending, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Take care, everyone.